Be irresponsible!
Be disrespectful!
Be everything this society hates!
These are the words of punk impresario Malcolm McLaren, which he used in his film called Oxford Street. Malcolm was an eternal student, managing to play the system so expertly that he made his art degree last for about 7 years. This, however, was nothing compared to Percy Bysshe Shelley, who throughout his life gained a reputation for being a serious danger to respectable, conventional society. Wait a minute, are we talking about the same person here? Shelley, the soppy poet who wrote about a skylark?
Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pouredst thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Higher still and higher, from the earth thou springest, like a cloud of fire, the blue deep thou wingest, and singing still dost soar, and soaring ever singest. Like a poet, in a light of thought, singing hymns unbidden, till the world is wrought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. Teach us, sprite or bird, what sweet thoughts are thine. I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. Such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then, as I am listening now.
This is not just a poem of praise and beauty. Shelley is questioning the skylark, asking it to teach him how to remain happy and how to create poetry that will be listened to. The skylark is a symbol of optimism and influence. This poem was written in 1820, which is quite late in Shelley's career. To find out exactly what kind of influence Shelley was hoping to achieve, we have to go right back to his school days and his time at Oxford University. Shelley was born into a wealthy, upper-middle-class family in Sussex in 1792, which was the 3rd year of the French Revolution. His unusual middle name, Bysshe, came from his grandfather. Shelley's father, Sir Timothy, sat in Parliament for 25 years and never made a single speech. He was, however, keen for Shelley to go into politics and took him to the House of Commons during the school holidays. He was proud of Shelley, but he believed that personal attributes were inherited, and as a result he had absolutely no idea where Shelley's intelligence came from. Young Bysshe soon rebelled. His behaviour from an early age augured what was to happen in later life. He was one of the most intelligent pupils at Eton, but he refused to perform their fag duties, which is an ancient system where the younger boys have to act as servants to the older ones. He would become enraged at injustice and earn the nickname Mad Shelley. He learnt quickly that those in positions of authority were far from the paragons of virtue that they were made out to be. He was already used to political discussion. I suppose you could call the dinner guests at Shelley's family home champagne socialists. Members of the Whig Party, they were wealthy nobility who detested the king, the mad George III. They were increasingly angered as well by the Prince Regent's dependency on the government to bail him out for his gambling debts. Does that sound familiar? Shelley refused to accept that respect or deference should be given to those in authority. The punk ethos is, I believe, to question everything and take nothing for granted, your class and background being completely irrelevant. The original punk, Vivian Westwood, said,
"Well, you could come from a tower block or be the middle-class person who went to Cambridge. The whole point about punk was that it was a group of outcasts from whatever background, and that was the common bond. All the mavericks came together in camaraderie and recognition. It was to do with having an attitude of being human, not just part of the system."
Shelley embodied this attitude as a teenager when he wrote a collection of poems under the pseudonym of Margaret Nicholson. She was a washerwoman who had attempted to assassinate King George in 1786. In this poem, which had no title when it was published in 1810, Shelley describes the horrors of war instigated by power-obsessed tyrants.
"Monarchs of earth, thine is the baleful deed, thine are the crimes for which thy subjects bleed. Ah, when will come the sacred fated time, when man, unsullied by his leader's crime, despising wealth, ambition, pomp and pride, will stretch him fearless by his foeman's side? Ah, when will come the time, when o'er the plain no more shall death and desolation reign? When will the sun shine on the bloodless field, and the stern warrior's arm the sickle wield? Not while some king in cold ambition's dreams plans for the field of death his plodding schemes. Not whilst for private pique the public fall, and one frail mortal's mandate governs all. Swelled with command and mad with dizzying sway, who sees unmoved his myriads fade away, careless who lives or dies so that he gains some trivial point which he took the pains. What then are kings? I see the trembling crowd, I hear their fulsome clamours echoed loud, their stern oppressor pleased appears a while, but April's sunshine is a monarch's smile. Kings are but dust, the last eventful day will level all and make them lose their sway, will dash the sceptre from the monarch's hand, and from the warrior's grasp rest the ensanguined brand.
Once again, Shelley gives us a hopeful and optimistic viewpoint. The tyrant will be overthrown. He had started to write poetry at an early age. One of his childhood poems was dedicated to the cat. Whilst he was at Oxford University, Shelley also began to write serious political prose. One particular piece got him expelled. He had been at university less than 6 months when he wrote the pamphlet, The Necessity of Atheism. He sent it to the Dons, the Doctors of Divinity, and all the bishops. It was put on sale in Oxford High Street, and it was there for about 20 minutes before being removed. A similar thing happened when the Sex Pistols album, Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, was put on sale in 1977.
Christopher Seal, a Nottingham shopkeeper, was taken to court for displaying a 9-foot by 6-foot copy of the album sleeve in his window, violating the 1898 Indecent Advertising Act. Defending the case was John Mortimer QC, who wrote Rumpole of the Bailey, and he brought in Professor Kingsley, who was the head of English Studies at Nottingham University. He told the court that the word bollocks had been in use for almost 1,000 years. It was an Anglo-Saxon word for a small ball, and had been employed in veterinary manuals, literature and Bibles ever since. It had also been applied to describe clergymen who spoke what is fondly referred to as nonsense. The defence went on to suggest that the furore and resulting court case were not directed at the use of the actual word, but the band in question. The cover was ruled to be decent, setting a legal precedent, and thousands of shopkeepers were now able to display the album without fear of prosecution. Marvellous.
Shelley was not so fortunate. He was summoned before the masters. When he refused to deny or confirm that he had written the pamphlet, he was expelled, as was his friend and fellow suspect, Thomas Jefferson Hogg. Shelley's father wrote to him, urging him to apologise. Shelley refused. His father cut off his allowance. Shelley was now an outcast from his aristocratic background. He stuck to his principles. To apologise or to dismiss the pamphlet as a prank would be to denounce everything that he believed in. Shelley creates a logical argument based on proof and the interpretation of evidence.
The strength of belief is in proportion to the degrees of excitement. The first degree is the evidence of the senses. If the deity should appear to us, this revelation would command belief. The second degree is reason, the decision of the mind founded upon our own experience. In a case where two proportions are diametrically opposite, the mind believes that which is less incomprehensible. It is easier to suppose that the universe has existed from all eternity than to conceive a being capable of creating it. A man knows not only that he now is, but there was a time when he did not exist. Consequently, there must have been a cause. We can only infer from effects, causes, exactly adequate to those effects. There certainly is a generative power. We admit that the generative power is incomprehensible, but to suppose that the same effect is produced by an eternal, omniscient, almighty being leaves the cause in obscurity, but renders it more incomprehensible. The third degree is the testimony of others. It is required that it should not be contrary to reason. Our reason could never admit the testimony of men who not only declared that they were eyewitnesses of the miracle, but that the deity was irrational, for he commanded that he should be believed, proposed the highest rewards for faith and eternal punishments for disbelief. We can only command voluntary actions. Belief is not an act of volition. Testimony is insufficient to prove the being of a God. We have shown that it cannot be deduced from reason. Those who have been convinced by the evidence of the senses, they only can believe it. Every reflecting mind must allow that there is no proof of the existence of a deity. So there. Sorry.
By this time, the 19-year-old Shelley was living in London, in what could be called digs, or in punk terms, a squat. With virtually no income, he would have found it extremely difficult to pay for accommodation. One of Shelley's friends described his rooms as untidy, covered in books, boots, papers, and remains of chemical experiments. The floor and furniture were damaged by the agency of fire. It doesn't sound too different from the bizarre room occupied by Ray Burns, more commonly known as Captain Sensible, who's a guitar player from punk band The Damned, here described by the lead singer, Dave Vanian.
His bedroom? You open the door and it was an absolute mess. He had a big old wireless which he plugged his guitar into, and it worked. Then you notice it was all done out like a railway station waiting room. It was all painted exactly right, these horrible greens. Before they pulled down Selhurst railway station, he'd broken in and stolen all the signs. He loves his railways. The bed was the only giveaway that someone lived there.